And a very good evening to everybody, and welcome to this next in our Music Revival online series of live streams. This is Christopher Daigan once again coming to you from our home on Saturday the 22nd of January. A moment of calm there. I'm trying to take deep breaths and just focus my attention because tonight's going to be a rather challenging program for me. I hope that you can join me for the next hour or so when I'll be playing a selection of mostly Mozart. I'm going to be focusing on a number of Mozart Rondos. So very interesting music, including a piece of music that Mozart wrote for clockwork, very interestingly, and also not a small, little slight piece of music, but in fact one of the pieces that he wrote in the last months of his life. Now, once again, I have had many questions about the financial implications of everything involved in the live streams and also the possibilities of the live concerts. There are obviously possibility for some live concerts to take place with limited audiences. I am attempting to do this. I will be staging 2 concerts in the KZN area next weekend. The details will be announced or will be available on my website shortly if you haven't received them already. And this is, of course, then complementing, or why should I say, doubling then onto the live stream program. Many people have asked about the future of the live stream program. And while it seems uncertain as to how long this lockdown situation is going to be going on, my expectation was that we would be carrying on with the live streams indefinitely until it's over. But even once the lockdown is over, I've had many people request or wonder about how this is going to work and what's going to happen. The good news is that I am intending to carry on with the live streams indefinitely. However, once the lockdown is over, there probably won't be twice a week. There will be a reduced number of live streams and they won't obviously be free of charge. So I will carry on with live streams, but it will be a gated program. In other words, you will have to pay to see it. Of course, this brings us, I think tonight is live stream number 191. Even little Lucy is reminding me of that. And so this program tonight is another in our series of freely available live streams as we have made them since the 28th of March 2020. And tonight's program is a very, as I say, challenging. There's a number of very delicate, very light, but they're more transparent might be the better word. Much of the music, for some reason, with these rondos, Mozart wrote in a very transparent manner. In other words, there are very few notes. They're written very much, all of them, in the top half of the keyboard. And so it's a very beautiful program. And then I've contrasted that to link in a different mood and a different style with music by Grieg and Chopin, 2 composers who were obviously heavily influenced by Mozart's music, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later on. I'm going to start off with a concert rondo, a piece of music that Mozart wrote intended for a solo performance, concert performance for himself to play. A rondo, briefly, is a piece of music that you are going to hear quite a few times. A style of music or a form, a shape, a design, the way the music designed and its structure, quite a few times this evening. And what really happens is a particular theme or a particular melody which you hear at the beginning of the work is repeated a number of times throughout. So you get an opening melody, something slightly contrasted. The return of that opening melody, something else slightly contrasted. The return of that opening melody and melody idea, and then he sometimes goes on 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 5 different sections. And the other thing about the rondo is that they generally are quite playful. There's a certain lightness and elegance and exuberance to this music, although there is going to be a contrast. So this first contrasting piece of music is a typically bright and exuberant rondo in D major, a very resplendent and royal key. Mozart has a lot of brightness and a great sense of humor. For me, I always say about this particular rondo theme that it never seems to really go away. It's transformed. In other words, you hear it in different places. You sometimes hear it appear suddenly in the left hand. Suddenly it appears in a minor key. In other words, change from, you sometimes hear, which changes the character of it, or you hear it in the bass. It sort of pops up just when you least expect it in the most unexpected places. That's probably what I meant to say. And then straight after that, just by terms of contrast, today is a beautiful summery evening. Suddenly the sun has decided to appear and we've had 2 beautiful, clear days with great warmth, and it just seems that this Grieg Nocturne, piece of night music that speaks of great Norwegian fjords and landscapes of midnight sun, you might say, I'm going to play. It's a wonderfully languid piece of music and a wonderful contrast to Mozart's music. Grieg himself, very interestingly, wrote a number of piano versions, or recomposed, or kind of additions, you might say, to Mozart's piano sonatas. He wrote them for two pianists. In other words, one pianist plays the sonata as Mozart wrote it, but then Grieg wrote another part for the second pianist to play, adding on to it. So it really transforms the music from this elegant 18th century music into something quite 19th century rich and quite dramatic sometimes, full of interesting harmonies and textures. It's wonderful to hear this music, and I will post a link in the comments at the end of this to lead you to one of these performances on YouTube. It's wonderful to hear the music that you hear so well known, Mozart's original, but with someone else's hand, a kind of icing on the cake, or a coloring sort of in different ways around the music, so you hear something you know very well but in a completely different guise. Anyway, this is to start off with in the Rondo in D major and a Nocturne by Edvard Grieg. two very contrasted worlds there. The bright elegance of a concert rondo by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart to start with a D major, contrasted with the very languid and very sultry nocturnal sounds of Edvard Grieg. Now you can imagine what Grieg would have composed, what the second piano part that he would have composed to Mozart's rondo. It's sort of a very odd combination of two different worlds, but very interesting music nevertheless to listen to, Grieg's accompaniments to Mozart's piano sonatas. Now I'm going to continue with another rondo, this time a rondo in F major K494, and this is a rather interesting way that this piece fits into something else. Mozart composed a rondo, this particular rondo in F, and then decided later on to add it into another sonata, and so he used it as the finale, the third movement of the sonata K533. So we call this the sonata K533 stroke 494 because the first two movements are one composition. Then he thought, well, instead of writing a new rondo or a new final movement, I've got something already that I can use. He did make a few changes. He added a section which is a little bit more dramatic, a free, spontaneously improvised idea, you might say. Well, it's supposed to sound like an improvised idea. But it's a very charming rondo. It can be performed on its own or it can be performed as part of the sonata as a whole. And what's again very interesting about it, if you look at the music that Mozart, piano music that Mozart was writing, even the other sonatas around this time, they often have very dramatic and very grand ideas. For instance, the sonata in C minor, or the fantasy in C minor. These are pieces of music which Mozart really using the whole range of the keyboard that was available to him. Yet in this particular rondo, he writes the entire, almost the entire composition very much in the top half of the piano. So it has a very transparent, a very light, airy feel to it. And it's also a piece of great charm. As I say, these rondos generally have a very charming theme and a sense of playfulness, even humor at times. What you'll hear in this rondo, and what's particularly interesting to listen out for, is the way that he ornaments and changes the main theme. So the first time you hear it, and every time he brings it back, he adds a little bit of ornamentation around it. Instance, and then later on even another one. Etc. And so it's a very interesting concept to hear how Mozart would have ornamented or created versions even in his own spontaneous performances. He might have written this down, but it does give you an idea that when he was playing his own music, he might have improvised and created versions of these melodies. Instead of just playing the same thing again and again, he might have, on the spur of the moment, created something quite different. And it's part of the performance process, you might say, to try and invent that even sometimes when you need to. So it's a very charming rondo. K494, as I say, it's written very much in the top part of the piano. It's very transparent and very light. And then after that, I'm going to play a beautiful Chopin Nocturne. Chopin was so inspired by Mozart already. He was a great musical hero. Not only the naturalness of the human voice that inspired his piano music. If you listen to a melody like that, it's very singable. It's a very almost charming, childlike nursery rhyme type melody that Mozart writes. It sits within the voice very easily. And this idea is something that Chopin really was very inspired by, always writing for the piano in such a way that it resembled or it's inspired by the range and the style of singing of the human voice. And that's really what makes Chopin's music have this very personal and human feel to it. And I think it's part of the way in which Chopin communicates humanly so particularly well. So I'm going to play a wonderful nocturne that I'm very fond of, the Nocturne in E flat, opus 55, number 2. Beautiful melody, but also such interesting patterns in the left hand, interesting nuances. I've constantly found this piece fascinating, and it's going to be lovely to bring it to you again. But first of all, the Rondo K494 by Mozart. Next two pieces in our program this evening, which is focusing on a number of Mozart rondos, much of which are actually quite rarely played. Certainly that rondo in F major 494 and the rondo that I started with, the D major rondo, is very seldom played in public, but they're very charming pieces. Now I'm going to move on to something rather fascinating after that combination of Mozart and Chopin. And this is a piece of music that Mozart wrote for musical clockwork. He was commissioned by a count who was particularly erratic, one might say, or had rather unusual ways, and decided that this count had commissioned a number of composers, including Beethoven and Haydn, who also wrote for the same combination, of a musical clock that had a small organ attached to it, and so it would be like a barrel organ. It had a machine-like character. You could have a way of programming, you might say, in the time of the day. Mechanized barrel which would create this organ, the organ would sound, and the pipes would play the notes according to what the composers had written. And so Mozart, in the last years of his life, very last months of his life, in fact, set about writing a number of pieces. He wrote to a friend of his and said, well, actually this wasn't really as what he intended. It wasn't very exciting because the range of the organ was, again, very small. It occurs in the top half of the instrument or the piano, not a full-sized organ. Nowadays, these pieces are actually played on the organ sometimes or arranged for various other instruments, but it actually works quite well on the piano. And I would like to play this Andante in F major K616 by Mozart for you. Now, it's rather an unusual piece of music. It's rather complicated because certainly Mozart didn't have the hands of the pianist in mind. He wrote on 3 separate staves, 3 separate lines, and it's quite tricky sometimes to create all these textures and sounds together with just 10 fingers when the composer wasn't thinking of that instrument at all when he wrote it. It's a very fascinating and I think a very interesting piece of music, very, very rarely played. Straight after that, I'd like to play an Adagio in B minor, also by Mozart. And this is a piece of music which I think adds a wonderful touch, a wonderful balance to the program, because it really shows Mozart in a very somber, you might say, even mournful at times, the way that the music hangs very static, in a very slow way, and with these almost like a sighing outcry. This feeling of pain, of a real intense, a kind of anxiety that he releases in the music. But as so often with Mozart, when he presents something which is so intense and so painful, he then immediately contrasts it with something which is very much like a balm. So it's I think a very beautiful piece. It's really, I think, a very substantial piece of Mozart's, the Andante in B minor, or the Adagio in B minor, K540. Again, a piece of music which we don't often hear in concert, but certainly is going to fit very well into this program. And then to finalize and bring everything together in tonight's program, I'm going to end off with the Turkish Rondo. It's commonly known as, although it's actually the last movement of the sonata in A major. Alaturka is written in the Turkish style because of this very unusual melody. As opposed to, which might be the more usual mode or scale that Mozart would have used, as well as this beating drum, the clanging of triangles and cymbals as the Turks march with their janissary bands. Certainly in Mozart's great imagination, he wanted to conjure up something exotic, something very bright, something with great energy and enthusiasm, and it is a fabulous piece of music. The last movement of the sonata in A major, known as the Turkish Rondo. It's not really a rondo, but it's written alla turca in the Turkish style, and it's going to provide a lovely end to this evening's program. So first of all, the Andante in F, K616, originally written for mechanical clockwork. The Adagio in B minor, K540, and then the alla turca, all by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. That was the Turkish Rondo, the Adagio, the last movement from Mozart's sonata in A major. I think I played that especially for my friend Julie in Turkey, in Istanbul, who I'm sure is watching this evening once again. And before that, I played the Adagio in B minor, also by Mozart, and started off with that very complicated little piece of music in F major, the Andante, in F major for the mechanical clock, K616, composed, as I said, in Mozart, the last months of Mozart's life. Certainly not a trifle, not a lightweight composition, but Mozart must have been quite amused by the challenge of trying to create for a machine that would play organ music purely by itself. And of course, let's just see who is coming to visit. Here we have got little Frida, who is going to... Frida, have you ever seen a mechanical clock? No, you haven't. Nor have I, actually. I've never seen a mechanical clock. It's quite rare. It's interesting that Mozart wrote such interesting music, not only for mechanical clock, he also wrote for the glass harmonica, some very interesting music. Yes, you like all that glasses. Yes, anything that you like about glasses when your food is in it. Yes, Fred, we know that. And let's see who else. Let's see, little Lucy is coming to say hello. Hello, little Luce. Look how sweet you are. Little Lucy's sweetness. And little Luce, what have you been doing today apart from nothing? What could be a licks? Yes, you're just so excited. You're having such a good day. You had a splendid day. You've been just have nice lazy times in the sun by the pool, and then chasing monkeys around the garden a little bit, and looking for an adventure in the bottom of the garden by the forest, and then snoozing. Yeah. Little Luce, this little sweet Lucy who everyone loves to see. Luce is such a big fan. Got so many fans out there. Luce has got a bigger fan base, I think, than I have. Everyone says, no, we have to have Lucy on the live stream. Why can we not have Lucy all the time? Perhaps we should have a special show just for Lucy. Yeah. Well, please join me again next week. I have an interesting program on Wednesday with some interesting ideas. I'll be approaching a number of the most celebrated piano pieces and giving you some more details. I often glance through these things about the Moonlight Sonata and the Livestream and the Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring, and I'm really going to go in depth and try and explain to you and give you some clips and some info and some influences about these pieces and where they actually came from, and a little bit more about the stories. And then next Saturday evening I have an I'm looking at the wrong camera, incredibly exciting program of all the Chopin scherzi, the scherzos by Frederick Chopin, number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each of these very demanding, dramatic, but lovely, exciting music. Major project that I'm working on, and I'll be playing all 4 of these in one program. So that's next Saturday night. Do join us then. Thank you to Barry for the technical support. Thank you everyone for coming along this evening. Hope you've enjoyed the selection of music by Mozart. As I said, rather challenging, rather tense for me to keep all those very delicate, fragile textures together and all that very exposed piano writing. Sorry about the wrong notes. Sorry about all the things that went wrong, but I hope you enjoyed hearing the music, if not the performance as well. Look forward to seeing you next time. Look after yourself, keep well, and stay well.